nor Jerry Ford have any belief whatsoever in the single bullet theory. That Jerry Ford remains unconvinced because Jerry Ford is sitting with the coroner's report on JFK and knows where the bullet entered in his back. And for it to be the magic bullet, it would have had to have come much higher in the neck. And Jerry Ford is sitting with the coroner's report, the examination, and he knows exactly where the wounds are. And he says it couldn't possibly be a single bullet because nothing works in the ballistics of this thing. And Lyndon Johnson says to Richard Russell to convey to Jerry Ford, look, if a single bullet doesn't work, there's more than one shooter. If there's more than one shooter, it's a conspiracy, which is what the Frank Church Senate Committee said in 1975, and you mentioned that.
Right.
But there's more than one shooter. If there's more than one shooter, it's a conspiracy. If it's a conspiracy, and it turns out that the Soviets are involved, they're not, but it turns out that the Soviets are involved, are we going to risk the deaths of 40 million people in a world war over the death of one person who's not coming back? Change the coroner's report and sign on to the single bullet theory. Well, that convinces Richard Russell. That convinces Jerry Ford. Jerry Ford doctors the coroner's report that's submitted to the Warren Commission, and we emerge with a single bullet theory. Hence, Oswald is a lone shooter, which he wasn't. But the point was, then 3 years later, Jerry Ford is the object of a couple of assassination attempts by the Manson gang. After Manson, and then later Manson says to us, "Oh well, I was working for the government, and you have no idea what the government can do." Yet Manson's real goal was he wanted to get Doris Day's son to get him into the recording industry. So there's some Melcher. So there's some kind of real connection there between the Process Church, the OTO, Jerry Ford, UFOs, and the conspiracy surrounding the Kennedy assassination.
And because all of these different players are so unbelievable in themselves, the story gets buried because nobody can get their mind around it. I mean, if you're talking about the Process and Charles Manson and Ford and the UFOs and the Kennedy assassination all in the same sentence, they're going to fit you out for an aluminum foil hat, right? I mean, that's what happens. So you're devalued. The message is devalued immediately because it's so strange.
Yes.
Yeah,
but that doesn't mean it's wrong.
Right.
Yeah.
And so that's, Nancy was mentioning about Robert Anton Wilson. And of course,
that's his territory, and it's insane, and it's also Thomas Pynchon. It's Thomas Pynchon right now. And it's too insane for one human mind to hold, which is why I find Peter's work so fascinating. It's almost like, Peter, you're trying to figure this out.
Oh, yeah, I think it's the only game in town. I mean, it is the ultimate detective story, and in order to solve this one big case, which I believe is one case, basically, you could call it a conspiracy. I'm still not even sure if conspiracy is even the right word to use. Could be a meta-conspiracy of some kind, but I think this is the only real detective story that makes sense, and it's led me into all kinds of different areas. I mean, I've been studying everything from, World War II history on the one hand to, the assassination stuff on the other hand, and gradually coming to realize that I was, on the periphery of things growing up, as probably most of us were who are involved in this. I mean, knowing Candy Jones briefly, and being connected to the church that was involved around Lee Oswald in New Orleans, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So you begin to realize that there's a different level of connectivity between people, places, and events. Yes.
We talk a lot about the American Orthodox Catholic Church.
Sure.
And that being at the center, I mean, there was Hoover. There was Guy Bannister, who worked for Hoover, obviously, and investigated the Maury Island stuff.
But why church? Why would people join or create a church, as opposed to, say, a club or something?
Well, do you remember? I mean, back in the 1950s and 1960s, if you wore a clerical collar, you had carte blanche. You could go in almost anywhere.
That's true.
You were. No one questioned you like they would do today, maybe. But in those days, no one questioned you. You were above reproach. You were above suspicion, and you always had a cover because no matter where you were on the planet, you had an excuse for being there. Unlike a politician or a soldier or a businessman, even as a member of the clergy. I mean, the people that I saw coming in and out of that church were from all over the world. I mean, from Africa, from Europe, from the Middle East, from Asia. They had virtually, I would say, no understanding of Orthodox Christianity, as an example. You know, there was no need for it. They came, they got their documents, they went home, and they got involved in their own thing. So it was a front. I mean, it was a very useful front. If you belong to a club, you don't really have the credentials, or you don't have the ability to travel to all of these arcane places and you know, without being questioned. One of the priests who was involved with this group was Father Fox, and Fox was a strange guy. I mean, he had a lot of traveling to Vietnam during the 60s. You know, what Catholic priest was making that many trips to Vietnam? All sorts of things were possible with that particular church. So you had Guy Bannister, David Ferry, Jack Martin, Tommy Baumler, who incorporated the Process Church. You know, the guy who actually did the papers and set up the Process Church, Tommy Baumler, was a bishop in the American Orthodox Catholic Church, brought in by Jack Martin, you know, in New Orleans. I mean, the connections are totally insane. They're bizarre.
That's
you
right.
know, so, yeah, do you have a connection then between the Process Church and the Kennedy assassination? Are you kidding me? And yet there it is.
Yeah, it's very true. But when I go through your books, and I'm reading about the sinister forces, and obviously about and you and Joseph Farrell really also talk a lot. Of course, we did this episode on UFO hunters about the Nazi Bell, die Glocke, the Wunderwaffen, the Wunderwaffe, and the thing about it is, and of course, one of the key figures you mentioned at NASA was, of course, Kurt Debus, a whole thing about him. But the fascinating thing about it is I keep wondering, and I'm asking you what you think, if there is a singularity. Okay, you're a detective, right? And you're solving a crime. Or you're getting to the bottom of a very large conspiracy for an ongoing crime. What is the center of that case? As a detective, what would you say is the center of that entire case involving the Process Church, the American Orthodox Catholic Church, the Kennedy assassination, the early space program, Werner von Braun and the Nazis that came over in paperclip? What's the nexus?
Well, you know, that's really trying to... you know, you're still looking for clues at the scene of the crime, and the nexus for me, if I would have to say, you know, to give an opinion, I believe that at some point someone or some group of people found out that reality is very malleable, that you can change perception, and if you change perception, you change reality. That somebody at some point learned that the magician's secret is that the magician can take the basic elements of what we know is real, or what we believe is real, and rearrange them to come out so that the end result is something the magician wants. If you think of that very first the tarot card, you know, of the Marseille deck, for those of you who are familiar with tarot cards, you have the magician standing in front of a table, and there's all of these bits and pieces on the table out of which he's creating a new world. And I think that the Manson secret is part of that. The reason why CIA and the Pentagon and so many other groups around the world, not just us, were so fascinated with trying to get into the human mind, because it's the black box. If you can get inside that black box, if you can get inside consciousness, figure out how it works, you can recreate reality. You can change everything. I mean, how much of what we think we know is a total fabrication? You know?
In that vein, talk a little bit about Manson's idea of going at the fear.
Oh, yeah. I mean, Manson said, get the fear.
Get the fear.
Get the fear. Manson's idea was you have to get the fear. If you can get the fear, then you can go past it. You can go through that veil of the temple. There's that veil that separates us from the secret, and of course that veil is fear. I mean, you are kept from going into the Holy of Holies from this insane sacred kind of fear. I think it was Guggenbuhl, a psychiatrist, who said that the experience of God is the experience of the sinister. It's the experience of tremendous fear and anxiety for the initial experience, I would say, probably. And I think that the fear is it. If you understand fear, if you understand how it works, how it's instilled in you, how actions of yours can instill it in someone else, you can begin to understand that this is a very powerful key towards manipulating a person's actions, their behavior. And I think that Manson understood that.
If reality is malleable, what are the evil doers manipulating reality? Towards what end?
Wow. Well, we as human beings like to think that we're all a pretty nice bunch of people, and that all we really want is for everybody to get along and be happy. But there's a number of people walking the streets among us who don't really look at it that way, who don't look at things from that point of view. They look at things in terms of power. And power is a little bit like money. I mean, everybody wants more than the other person has. And that seems to be what is motivating people like this. Power is extremely unknowable in general terms. I've come out with a book recently on Tantra, on tantric temples. And through the studying of Tantra, I found out that political leaders in Asia were very much involved in studying Tantra. And in Indonesia, in the early years before Islam came to the island, the kings of Java were tantric kings. I mean, they were very much involved in the practice of Tantra. Power, political power, what we think of Tantra as a sexual kind of practice, to these people was something deeper than that. I mean, sexuality was like the outer court. It was the porch, the portico of the temple. There was something deeper than sexuality. And that's why I think we find all of these sexual scandals surrounding politicians so often. Yeah. It's because of the link between the idea of power and sexuality. So I think this is visceral. I think the people who are involved in this, I mean, look at it this way. Why would an adult person molest a child? I mean, what on the evolutionary scale, look at it that way, from a scientific point of view, what is to be gained from it? We can't understand it. We don't understand what is motivating that kind of action. We don't understand what the benefit is from it. There must be something dark in this type of behavior, something that we hopefully don't really quite understand or can't get our mind around. So I think this pursuit of power is on a level that is that deep that it borders on the unconscious. And I think that yes, go on.
What psychiatrists, and I work with John Liebert, who we can talk about later, who worked with you and Cameron at McGill University on MK Ultra, so we can talk about that. That's fascinating. I can share some of his views about that with you. But because I know you mentioned Cameron a lot, and
sure.
Anyway, one of the things that psychiatrists and kind of police psychiatrists say is that when you talk about molestation and rape, when you talk about sexual crimes, there is probably one of the most, outside of revenge, and they're more like suicidal mass murderers are out for revenge, the element is really power. Rape, whether it's heterosexual, whether it's in no matter what form it takes, the whole Jerry Sandusky at Penn State and things like that, it's an exercise of power for the individual who believes he's powerless, even though that person may appear to the outside, like a politician, to be a powerful individual. It's that kind of exercise of power, the kind of it's anger / power. And so that is really one of the underlying causes, at least psychologically. It's pathological, of course, of what motivates the rapist to commit the crime. And for serial rapists, for kind of episodic serial offenders, sexual offenders. It's the whole neurological structure, the whole architecture